Welcome, everybody, to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where your rabbi reveals how the world really works. And I will remind you later on during the show that if any of you are interested, and a whole lot of people have signed up. This is quite amazing. A whole bunch of listeners have already joined. I'm very excited about that because I'm talking about the cruise next March, April that we're doing with Glenn Beck. And Susan and I are really looking forward to the leisure time on board the ship to catch up and talk and explore and get to know you. And all of that is available. More information on it, you just go to comesailaway.com. But I don't know how many Lapin cabins are still left. Those come with a discount. And by the way, if you happen to have booked before I started announcing the discount, you should still have got it as an early bird. So just make sure that you did get a $400 discount if you already booked. If not, you just be in touch with the organizers or with me. We'll straighten you out. And if you're thinking about it now, you can either go to Come Sail Away to get more info, or at our website and also at our Facebook page on social media, there is a link directly for the Rabbi Daniel Lapin cabins. Okay, as some of you know, this may be the first time in more than 30 years. This may be the first time that we are going to be on a boat that I am not commanding, captaining, driving. This is extremely unusual for me, and I ordinarily turn it down, but this looked like a very fun opportunity. So Susan and I will be on the ship as a passenger, not as a crew member, which is going to feel extremely bizarre to me, I have to tell you. But I am looking forward to it anyway. And guess what? You know who's here with me right now? None other than my collaborator, my partner.
That's a very loaded phrase these days. It kind of suggests we're not married.
Yes, definitely. And not planning to, right? If I said you were my girlfriend, like I spoke about a few weeks ago, at least that implies we may be moving towards a different status. But as you correctly pointed out, the new word partner is a stagnant term. It's who we are, it's where we are. But Susan, thanks so much. Always fun to do a show together with you. We don't do it nearly often enough, so I'm pleased I was able to grab a hold of you and seduce you into doing this show today.
You know, the option was cleaning chickens, so it really was my best offer right now.
Okay, well, let's start off with me interviewing you.
Oh, dear.
Okay. We'll start off in interview format. I mean, I don't expect it to hold to format because we are rule breakers all the time from beginning to end. But, okay, so here is something we've received two of in the last few days. We've received two letters from people who basically both said the same thing. We like you, we've known you for years, we think you're wise, you've got very great information, but we can no longer, in one case, be friends with you. In the other case, we cannot go with you on this cruise, which we otherwise might have wanted to do, because of your support for President Donald Trump. And so, Susan, to you then, that is the question. I want you to answer these two people who communicated with us and essentially expressed their disappointment in us and even their disdain. And in one of the cases, I think it verged on anger with us for supporting Donald Trump. So how can you, as a woman, support the serial groper and racist Donald Trump?
Well, actually, one of the, I would just change one verb you used. You said we like you and respect. It's we liked, past tense, you
Yes.
and respected you, and we no longer do because you support Donald Trump. In other words, somehow that has changed. Whether they're saying we must have been mistaken for the past 30 years that we've known you, or whether they're saying you've changed. Somehow something different has happened to you. I don't know which one of those it is, but one of them was specifically aimed at me more than you, though, because it was in response to a Susan's musings I wrote explaining why I'm even more enthusiastic about voting for President Trump in the next election than I was in the last one. And however, it included you as well because he knows that we're on the same page. And it was angry. And that was really fascinating to me because, and it's not a close friend, but it's somebody we've certainly known for a number of years, and we have many friends in common. And that's a strange emotion, anger. Even disappointment I can understand. You're disappointed when a friend or someone you've looked up to doesn't seem to be doing the right thing. But anger tends to suggest to me a refusing to face your own emotions. I mean, it's going to sound, I'm not a psychologist, but when you get angry, very often you're protecting yourself. In other words, I think it's actually very troubling because in some way this person has to believe they're right, but they're not 100% sure. Because if they were 100% sure, I don't think they'd be so angry.
So I'm going to let you answer specifically these people explaining why it is that we under no illusions. We don't think Donald Trump is a choir boy. We don't think that he is a good candidate to be hired as an assistant pastor at the local evangelical church. We understand all of that, but why we still eagerly and enthusiastically support his presidency and his candidacy in the next election. But before that, I just want to throw in a few other circumstances in which you get a similar kind of reaction. So, for instance, and I'm sure you have your own example, but for instance, if somebody with whom, a guy, imagine we've been friendly with the guy for a long time, and he comes along to introduce us to his girlfriend whom he is getting engaged to and wants to marry. And we really don't like her at all, but because of our friendship with him, we're obviously going to try and be nice, but it's perfectly obvious that she dislikes us even more. And so in a situation like that, he may well say, listen, you're not being nice to my girlfriend who's going to become my wife. I can no longer be friends with you.
I think that's a stretch. I don't think those are comparative at all. In other words, you're right. We've certainly had situations where people have introduced us to and intended, and we've said to ourselves, gosh, we think this is a mistake. We really don't, there's something about this person that really rubs us the wrong way. We wish our friend would ask us our opinion, but he's not. And we are courteous. So if he comes and now she doesn't like us and she's convinced him that we're not being courteous. And as I don't think it's an equivalent, I just don't, sorry,
okay.
I don't
All right, give me an equivalent situation.
You know what? I'm trying to think. Let's say, I'm not sure there is an equivalent situation. I have to tell you something. As you know, when I need a lift in my day, I go to the walkaway page on Facebook because I love the stories of people walking away from the Democrat Party. Just
give people a quick summary for people who don't know anything. I had lunch yesterday with not lunch, but I had a get-together with somebody who
didn't know about
it at all.
This is shocking because that person should, because they're very involved in politics.
Yes, correct.
By the way, Brandon Struck, who's the founder of the Walkaway Movement, spoke at the President Trump rally yesterday.
Oh, how wonderful.
Or 2 days ago. I don't know what it was.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Well, Brandon is was somebody who for years thought, as he was told to think, that all Republicans are horrible people, racist, homophobic, all those, put in all the obics that you want, that those were Republicans. And then something opened his eyes. And all of a sudden, he realized that, he says, he has a very funny line. He says he realized that CNN had lied to him. And could it be that they'd lied to him more than once? And he began doing his own research instead of just accepting whatever CNN told him as gospel truth. And he found out that he actually is not a Democrat because he believes in free speech. He's patriotic. He loves this country. He believes in people being allowed to have different opinions. He believes in helping the poor rather than just talking about helping the poor. All sorts of things made him realize he's actually not a Democrat. And he was then horrified to get the reaction from his friends, which is, well, we cannot be friends with you. The pushback was terrible. He started an organization called the Walkaway Movement, and he posted a video explaining why he was walking away from the Democrat Party, and he invited other people to do the same. And I believe it's a couple of 100,000 people at this point that have done so, either posted videos or told their stories. And I'd say the universal theme is that once they said the slightest positive thing about Donald Trump, relatives and friends said, I can't be your friend anymore. You're obviously a horrible person. And, so I do think this is unique because we certainly voted differently than many people in past years and past elections before 2016. But I don't know of anyone who said, I cannot be your friend because you voted for someone other than I voted, different than I voted for. So I really do think this is actually a unique situation.
Okay. All right. So answer those people now who are deeply disappointed in you and can indeed no longer be your friend, can no longer do this, that, or the other. Answer them on why you support Donald Trump and why you seem to surrender your integrity. One of those people was essentially saying, you've obviously shown that you're not a religious person at all, that you can support a guy like him.
So, this came in response because my hesitation at supporting Donald Trump 3 years ago, I guess at this point, was when there were other people in the race. And it was when it was before he was the candidate. And my hesitation is that I have spent many years teaching our own children, as well as teaching the members of our community when we had a synagogue, as well as writing about in my musings or in speeches that I've given, speaking about the importance of speech and how speech in Jewish life, in scriptural, there are so many verses one could quote, but a huge part of living a godly life, certainly in the Jewish tradition, and it's true in the Christian tradition as well, is being careful with your speech. The whole idea of sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me is not a biblical idea. The biblical idea is that words can harm terribly, in many ways more than breaking a bone.
And the speaker and the hearer.
To the speaker, to the hearer. And my kids, I used to tell the kids, as you know, they would not use what would be listed as real curse words in front of me. One child tried it once and she ended up walking home a few miles because I dumped her out of the car. But most of our kids thank God it's not language they use. But even using words like stupid or just making fun of somebody, that was not acceptable, and they knew it. And if something really extreme happened, I used to say, you may say, dearie me. And yes, that was funny, but the idea was there. Like, I don't care that you banged on your nail with a hammer. There's language we do not use. So all of a sudden, I'm faced with a man whose language is not up to my standards. And that was the thing that actually, for me, it was the language. It was the belittling of other people. It's calling names, calling other people names. All that stuff was the biggest issue for me, more than anything else.
And you'll remember that I explained and insisted, this was back in March 2016 during the Republican primary season, I explained that only somebody who was willing to be a street fighter on a level that you may not enjoy or like, but only someone like that stood even the slightest chance of winning against the Clinton machine with its ruthless ambition.
And I heard you, but it was still, as long as there was another option that I could have thought might win, I was, hoping that one of those other people, the fact is that each of the people I would have preferred for one reason or another ended up disappointing me and convincing me, even before they dropped out, that they were not going to be strong enough. And I was left with Donald Trump. And I was left with a choice. I mean, you don't get to choose who you want. We got to choose between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Quite frankly, when it comes to language, when it comes to treating women badly, I felt that she was worse than him. So at that point, I can go for the better of the two options on exactly these issues. The fact that the press does not report her temper tantrums and the times and the language, her language when she loses it. The fact is, we know that she does. The press just doesn't talk about it. The way she treated women, I don't believe Donald Trump has ever treated women as badly as Hillary Clinton has. And so then it was an easy choice. At that point, it was an easy choice. Now, 2 years later, and I did...
hold that thought for a second, because we'll come back.
Okay.
And you'll pick up from now 2 years later. And also, I will ask why. Why is it not a betrayal of your standards? Why is it not a betrayal of your principles? And of course it isn't, but I want to try and articulate just why. Because you and I are by far and away not the only people who are being attacked by friends and even family members. Not in our case, thank God, but many people are. And the attack very often is, I thought you were a decent person, and look at you. So, okay. By the way, it's also disgusting, the number of people in MAGA red hats who are being attacked.
Oh, physically assaulted.
Yes.
Or verbally. People
Yeah.
verbally and physically assault, which, again, we know
It's
if it was
pretty bad.
reverse. If it was the reverse, it would be the headlines of the New York Times every day.
Of course. But a quick pause, because we have an exciting new product.
We do.
And we have to talk about it right now.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to talk about it with particular reference. Okay, you know that I've been asking people in shows over the last few weeks to write and tell me where people are listening from, so I can put pins in my map. And anyway, we got a lot of people all over the world. We got a huge number of people in Australia listening. We got people in Canada. But I think the most dramatic growth over the last year or so on this show has been on the continent of
Africa.
Yep, exactly right. Which is, it's really very interesting, because I just went back to Africa for the first time in decades. I've been away from Africa.
And you loved it.
And I loved it. Yes, I was emotionally moved, but I loved the people I met in Ghana. But it's not just Ghana. It's Zambia, it's Zimbabwe, it's Nigeria. We even had somebody from Burkina Faso, whose capital is...
Not Wagadugu. Wait, what is it?
Ouagadougou,
yes.
Yeah, it's one of the greatest city names imaginable. But at any rate, a lot of folks in Africa. So this is of particular relevance to them. Go ahead, Susan, you're on.
Well, specifically, this resource is available to people who live in the United States and Canada as well. However, what we're most excited for people internationally, because it is a downloadable resource, and it is we have had 2 CDs that we sell that are downloadable on financial matters, on improving your financial situation, which has to do at the same time with improving yourself, because they go together in a biblical worldview. They go together. The better you are as a person, the better you will do financially, because you will serve other people in a greater way.
In other words, the key thing, and if you pardon me jumping in here, but here's the key thing is that if you want to become a better tennis player, you got to learn the things to do. If you want to be a better racing car driver, you got to learn things to do. But if you want to increase revenue through the process of economic interaction with other human beings, it's not enough to learn the things to do. You've got to learn things to do as well, like reading a financial statement. But you've also got to change who you are, not just what you do. You've got to change who you are, literally changing who you are. And that's why it really is, it's a human development program. But essentially, what we're talking about is revenue increasing the amount of money you make. There are a lot of great programs on investment, but
or getting out of debt. We recommend Dave Ramsey's books.
Yeah, there's all of those, and they're all very, very good. We're talking about specifically increasing income.
Well, So what we have now, a new resource, and it can be downloaded, which is wonderful. People in the United States or people who want to pay, or people in Canada can get it on a USB flash drive, but it's also downloadable, and it is 10 videos of my husband teaching the principles of increasing wealth and working on yourself, understanding money. It's the principles that have been in the books, in the CDs, in the appearances over the years, and it's put together into 10 videos, and that is now available. And since no one wants to pay extra money right now, as we're introducing it, it is on a special introductory price, and so people can actually save $50 by ordering now.
So it's broken down into 10 videos.
10 videos,
and you can either order it on a little USB thumb drive, which will come to you in the mail.
Right.
Or if you're
in the United States or Canada, you can do that.
But everywhere else in the world,
you can still access it.
And it's a digital download. So you go to the website at rabbidaniellapin.com, or youneedarabbi.com. That also works. And
you look for the Financial Prosperity Collection.
The Financial Prosperity Collection. And you will be able to read more about it there and see if that is something that you and your family will benefit from, or maybe you have a small group of friends who get together to help one another with business problems. By the way, I always recommended that. Napoleon Hill, I think, used to call it a mastermind group. But even just very informally, if you've got a group of friends who are all trying to build their finances and develop their economic strength, it's not the worst thing in the world to get together, twice a month or even once a month. And if you do, one of the things you might want to do is actually listen to one of these 10 lessons each time, and then have a discussion session and talk about how you have applied this principle in your own business life, or how somebody else has struggled with it. Whatever it is a very useful tool in expanding your financial shadow. Okay, so we will come back to that and remind people again, but all of that is at rabbidaniellapin.com. And now you when I interrupted you were saying, and now here we are 2 years later.
So 2 years ago, it was anybody except Hillary Clinton, because I honestly felt that the country was going to be in serious trouble, because not only do I not trust her, but I do and did believe that there was a deep state, and that she would get away with things. In other words, there was nothing to stop.
By a deep
her.
State, you mean a vast system of federal and state bureaucracies, peopled by individuals who all share a worldview congruent with that of the left wing of the Democratic Party.
Yes. And so that their interest was not in protecting the Constitution, but it would be in hiding anything negative and pushing forward agendas that were harmful to America. So Donald Trump, there was no choice for me. That was the best way to go. Now we're more than 2 years after President Trump has become president, and his actions, I just look at his actions and I think they've been great for the country for the most part. I'm not going to ever support somebody 100%. I didn't even support 100% of everything Ronald Reagan did. That's not realistic. I don't support 100% of what I do. That's not a realistic benchmark. But I believe that the country is better off, and there's at least an attempt to turn back policies that I see are leading the country towards destruction. So I vote very happily for him, because, as you say, he is a street fighter. And, we've been doing a lot of reading lately about General George Patton. And I wrote to somebody in a message, and I said, if my son, if we were a lot older and we had had children in World War II, I would have, I believe I have read that General Patton would greet new recruits with a tremendously profanity-laced welcoming speech.
Yeah, it was a vulgar tirade.
Very vulgar. And it was very deliberate, because he said he was getting good boys, what I would think our son, please God, would fall into. And these good boys were going to have to do things that they'd been basically taught not to do, to basically kill somebody else, to not wait and take them to a trial, but simply to on the spur of the moment to lean out and kill. They were going to have to deal with things. They were going to have to become tougher. And so as a mother whose child would have undergone that, I would have cried for my child's innocence. I spent years building a child who is innocent, and I mean innocent in a good way, not in a stupid, naive way, but building a child to speak well and to act well and to be courteous and kind. And now somebody was trying to rob him of that. Well, the alternative is that my child, God forbid, was going to be killed. So there's no, I don't like my two choices, but it's not that but I'm tremendously grateful for the choice, the one choice, which is he's going to be under General Patton, who I believe truly cares about him.
Do you know that General Patton wrote in his will he wanted to be buried not in Arlington Cemetery, and he came from a very prominent family. I mean, there's family burials. He insisted on being buried in a military cemetery alongside
his men,
the fallen men of the Third Army in Europe, where he lies.
So I do believe, different generals have different assets, different things they bring to the table. One of the things he brought was a love for his men. And I don't think that every general does feel that way. So it doesn't surprise me when you say that. I think his men felt that he loved them.
And not only that, I could well imagine, mothers of boys in the Third Army who prayed for Patton and loved the man because of what their sons would tell them about how he...
Right, so I'm saying, so not only would I say, well, I'd rather have him alive and exposed to some vulgarity. It's that I'm grateful because that's what has to happen right now. There's no other choice. I've got to live in reality. I don't get to live in the utopia of world peace where we can focus on courtesies and a higher level of behavior. We're living in a world where there's a monster out there trying to take
Susan,
over the world.
I think that if you entered a Miss Universe contest, I think you should win. But the only problem is that if you won and they said to you, so what would you like to see? I've got a feeling you're not going to come out.
Peace.
It's not going to come out with a world peace thing.
You're referencing whatever that movie was that the girls watched once.
Miss
Congeniality. Sandra Bullock, I think, movie.
Yeah.
But many people may not get the reference. But so Trump I think we do need a fighter now because I think that we really are in a war, and I do think we need a street fighter. He recently, he spoke about Baltimore and being rat infested and area. Oh, racist. And someone wrote and said, well, I agree Baltimore is rat infested, as Elijah Cummings and as many Democrats have said. But when Trump says it's racist, so he should have just maybe written a nice letter saying, gosh, I think Baltimore is having some problems. Maybe we should explore where all the money that Elijah Cummings has gone to. And that would have landed not even on page 48 of the New York Times. It would have landed nowhere. The reason it's on the front page is because he made it, he did it in an unrefined manner. That's why there's now attention being paid. And if you tell me that little children in Baltimore are going to grow up in a healthier environment because of that, I'm not going to say, gee, I think President Trump should not have spoken if he can't speak in a refined manner. He's helping them. He's done more for the city of Baltimore through that one comment than Elijah Cummings has done for years.
Okay, we're not done with that.
Well, we sort of have to be soon.
But all right. All right. We spoke earlier about our listeners in Africa. We got listeners in Pakistan. We've got listeners a new listener in Afghanistan this last week. By the way, we've got
we have listeners in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I know. It's really quite wonderful. I was originally disappointed when I left
radio
KSFO when I left terrestrial radio on the West Coast.
No?
No.
You were back on KSFO?
Don't you remember?
Oh, right. I'm sorry, yes.
For a long time we were on KSFO.
Sorry.
But the truth is, our audience is by orders of magnitude, it's far, far bigger today.
Yeah, podcasts are much bigger than radio.
It's incredible. And we consume podcasts because you can listen to what you want, when you want. Anyway, anyway, here's my question. Right now, we've been talking for a good few minutes about why our support for President Trump, why it is, and I think your comparison with General Patton is wonderful. It's very good. But now, put yourself in the mind of a listener in Saudi Arabia or Kenya or Nigeria or Brazil. Somebody, they're not that interested in American politics. It is what it is. It's not part of their world. What of what we've been talking about has involved a timeless truth or a permanent principle that would apply, that could have value in the life of a listener in another country, on another continent? In other words, what are we talking about here that is of permanent value?
Well, I'll tell you what it is, and I tend to think in terms of being a mother. So if I can answer, and then the men, they're fathers, or you can take it and translate it. But I think you have to deal with the reality on the ground. And this is true. So I'll say for any parent, but it's also true for marriage. It's true for everything. In other words, you can have, and I do think you have to have certain things that are absolute lines in the sand and you will not cross. But it's very easy to get caught up in, this is how I thought it should be done 10 years ago. This was successful 10 years ago. And the fact is the world is changing at such a quick pace that you have to be able to look at reality and not just to say, well, these are my beliefs. They've always been my beliefs. And this is the application of those beliefs is what's changed. In other words, I think that President Trump is standing up for my beliefs. The way he's doing it isn't the way I would have preferred. I'm sorry, that's where it has to be done. I really do think it has to be done.
In other words, you're saying the way you might have preferred it to be done, you accept would not work
Would
today.
not work. I was horribly disappointed. As you know, I was in tears quite a lot about Mitt Romney. I felt he was more invested in being a gentleman than winning, and he lost. Yeah. Well, being a gentleman loser was not good for America. What happened was not good for America.
Although I'd much rather, the way things have played out, I'd much rather
that led to President Trump because
I'm much happier with President Trump than I would be with President Romney.
That's a separate issue. But I want to say that there are things that as parents we maybe we were adamant with, and I watch our children with their children, and they can't do the same thing simply because the world has changed and they have to deal with the reality that's in front of them. They can't deal with the reality that was in front of us 20 years ago. And so I think that's part of it, that you have to know, in Jewish law, for example, you have to give up your life. If someone says to you, kill this person or I will kill you, you have to be killed. That's an absolute inviolate biblical law. But most things don't fall into that. Most things have a certain you can look at it and seek wise guidance, but you will get a different answer on many things than you would have gotten 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago. Things are different. So you've thrown some questions at me. I have a question for you, and I'm asking you now as not only my husband, but as my rabbi. Let us say that, God forbid, I don't even want to say it. So let's say somebody we loved had a very serious illness, and there are literally only 2 doctors available. And one of them is an upright, moral person we would love to have as our child's Boy Scout leader. We would love to have as a baby. We'd love to have our children stay in his, or should I say her to be politically correct? It doesn't matter. To stay in this person's house. If we were going away for 2 weeks, we would feel confident that our child would do well in their house. Doesn't happen to have a very good success rate as a doctor. A lot of his patients don't make it. A lot of his patients end up having to go back in for a second surgery because the first one was botched. And the other person is a doctor with an excellent success rate and is a known adulterer. Now, or maybe he's, he's known to be nasty even to his wife, let's say. He's not a good father. We would never put our children in his house. We would never see this person as a role model, as a citizen, as a father, as a neighbor. Are we morally and religiously obligated to go? These are only 2 choices, remember. Are we morally and religiously obligated to pick the doctor who is likely to be less successful?
Absolutely not. Let's call it, in future, I think we should call this the General Patton Principle. which is that, look, I think that the British General Montgomery, for instance, was probably a more refined person than General Patton, but he wasn't as effective. Now, he wasn't a nobody or anything. I mean, he administered, he was okay, but he wasn't a General Patton by any means. So, yeah, I don't think there is any suggestion that there is a biblical principle that you have to pick somebody who's worse for you at the job you need done, but who is a nicer person or a more moral person. Now, happily, in the real world, it doesn't always boil down to...
It doesn't usually. Usually we have more than two choices.
Right. But your analogy is clear and it's understood, and that is that we're looking for a doctor here to fix America, and we found one. And that's very different from somebody we might choose to have a different kind of relationship with.
That's
right.
That is my point. And so and the funny thing is, to me, is one of the things that the person who wrote me being very angry at me for supporting President Trump was, I think he said this more than once, that he feels I'm betraying my religion, and he feels Christians who are supporting President Trump are betraying their religion. And I did ask him, and because we had a little bit of a correspondence, and then I finally said, neither of us are going to change the other one's mind, so I think that we should leave it at that. At this.
Also, he was getting extremely rude, which was shocking because we've known this person for years. And we've heard from so many different people that long-term relationships, family have been shattered. It still feels really weird when it happens to you.
So I did. What I said was, I just think, and in the Jewish community, if you would draw a graph of how observant the Jewish person is in terms of keeping the Sabbath, keeping kosher,
basically
external things that you could say, following the Bible, and support for Trump, those go together. The less observant a Jew is, the more of an ethnic Jew they are, or just a cultural Jew, or calling themselves Jewish and not actually even necessarily being Jewish. Those people are the ones who hate President Trump. So, I mean, if you're right, an awful lot of you're really in this huge minority of people who think like you do. Is there any possibility that you are the one who's not understanding something?
Did he answer that point, by the way? Because this is to just clarify, I want to just make sure people really get this, which is that the more Orthodox Jews are, the more they conform to biblical law, the more they support Trump. So the idea that President Trump. The idea that somehow supporting President Trump is incompatible with religious values, I'm sorry, that simply is not the case. And we're not expert in the Christian world, but certainly among our friends and the people we know, a very large number of people who are seriously committed evangelical Christians who take the faith very seriously are also supporters of President Trump. Whereas those who are subscribers to the more left-leaning denominations of Christianity, such as, I'm not even going to name names, they oppose the president. That pattern is replicated in the Jewish community as well. But it's really pretty amazing. I mean, I would like to know what...
Well, this is why you said, is he angry? And I think the anger can only come from a feeling... He didn't refute any one of the points I made. He always came back with just, I don't know how you can do this. It's so against your values. And every question I asked was ignored. So I think that's where the anger comes from. The anger comes from, I think, a deep internal feeling that I'm wrong. But I've made this stand and I'm going to stand for it. And so I'll just throw punches because I can't actually answer any of the arguments.
Do you if anything else occurs to you on this, just pop in with it because I'm going to change gears a little bit. Was there something else you were going to say?
No, that's it. I actually think I have to go now. So it's been lovely spending time with you.
I am not letting you go.
Oh.
I'm not letting you go.
You're not the boss of me.
Well... Yes, I am on this, and we
had a child used to say that you're not the boss.
was-
Did they or did they
No,
just
they
did they say it as a
absolutely
joke
did.
or for real?
No, they always used to say, whenever you
I don't think always, because I don't think that would have gone for a long time.
It wouldn't have. But no, one of our children had this phrase: whenever we'd issue an instruction, "You're not the boss of me."
I think they said it with I think she said it with a smile. I don't think she ever thought that was going to fly.
Well, we'll check with her.
But I really do have
about
things I
that.
have to do.
I understand that, and the Sabbath is arriving
Yeah, it's
soon.
Friday.
And you are
That's just-
preparing a beautiful Shabbat for us, and as people may or may not know, we are not allowed to actually cook and prepare food on Shabbat. It all has to be done before, which is what tends to make Fridays extremely busy for Susan. But married people can't walk away unilaterally, and
You can come help me cook.
well, I can, but I still want to talk to a few 100,000 of our closest friends. And what I wanted to talk about was, I wanted to tell you that the great and fantastic economist Thomas Sowell,
Yes.
I was reading his Discrimination and Disparities book again, and he pointed out something which I think we've always known, but it was just nice to see it again. He spoke about the New York City had several huge power outages.
Yes.
There was one in the 1930s, but the main one he was talking about was 1965.
I remember that one.
Do you really?
I was a child.
In 1965? Yeah. Oh. Well, you must have been very teeny.
Pretty much so, yes.
Yes, you were. And did the power go out in Brooklyn also, or just Manhattan?
Brooklyn is New York.
Nah, come on, it's not really. It's
It
Long
really
Island.
is. No, it isn't.
This is an old argument we have. But anyway, Thomas Sowell points out that in 1965 and in previous power outages in New York, there was never any looting.
It was beyond not looting. It was a helpfulness. In other words, people were stuck places, and it was a neighbors helping neighbors.
That's right. Comes 1977, and there's another big outage, and in that outage and subsequent ones, there was looting, there was bad behavior, like rising crime, horrible things happening. So all the way up to somewhere between 65 and 77, everything changed. Mm-hmm. There were no major outages other than 65 and 77 in that gap. So we don't know if it changed in 68 or 72, but in up to 65, when power went out in New York, everybody was lovely. After 77, when power went out in New York, things went horribly and very badly. He also pointed out that up until the early 1960s, one of the most popular restaurants in the New York area was called the Exchange Buffet.
I do not remember that. They weren't kosher, I'll tell you that.
No. And they had numerous out there. It was very popular, and there were many others of a similar kind. How did this work? You would come in, and it was like a buffet. You'd walk past the shelves with your tray, and here's the interesting thing. I think maybe they thought it was rude to have you then go to the cashier, because that's not how it worked. You filled your tray with everything you wanted for your meal. You went to your table and you sat down and you enjoyed it. And then before you left, you stepped up to the cashier's booth and you told the cashier what you'd enjoyed, what you had, and the cashier would give you a bill and you'd pay. And this is how it worked for nearly 100 years, all the way up to 1962. And it was then in the early 60s that this place finally went bankrupt and they closed. Why? Because the theft just kept on rising and rising and rising. And they didn't want to change their model. They saw themselves as providing hospitality, and they didn't like the idea of putting the cashier in the line so as you can't get your food until you've paid. And so they closed and it went. So Thomas Sowell points out that, again, in the same way I've often said on this show, that somewhere in the early 60s, that is when America changed. Now, here is what I wanted to ask you. Look, when somebody looted in 1977, if they were the sort of people you could have sat down with and said, I want to ask you a question. Is it right or wrong that you loot? They probably would have said, well, it's wrong.
Probably, yeah.
Probably, right? But I don't care. If you would have asked people in 1965, is it right or wrong to loot, they'd have said wrong, no question about it. And they didn't do it. In 1977, they probably also would have said wrong.
But done it.
But did it. If you would have gone up to somebody in an exchange cafeteria, a buffet cafeteria, and said, I saw you lie to the cashier, telling him or her you ate less than you really did.
They would have been embarrassed.
They would have been embarrassed, right? They would have said not good. So the thing I wanted to just chat about with you for a few minutes is it isn't enough to know the right thing or to know the wrong thing.
Well, can I just take this a little further? Because now when people loot, this is owed to me. It's they're proud of it. It's they're not even.
It's gone a stage further today. Yeah. Today, yes, it almost looks hopeless. That's right. But there are many instances where we do the wrong thing and we know perfectly well that it's the wrong thing. So why do we do it?
Because whatever it are, impulses or we're weak. We're human beings.
So we don't have moral willpower.
Yeah.
Right? So the idea that you often hear expressed in secular circles is people need to be taught what's right and what's wrong. And I am asking you whether that's sufficient. It would seem to me that many people do wrong, knowing full well that it's wrong. So it's clearly not a problem. And again, this is true for every country we're being heard in right now. This is not unique to America. And that is that what protects a society from sliding down the slope of moral decay, resulting finally in financial decay, because you cannot have one without the other, is not just a case of, well, we're not teaching people what's right and wrong anymore. That isn't hard to do. What's much harder to do is to provide the moral willpower. How does that happen?
Well, if I can just go back on something you just said moral decay leads to financial decay. The opposing secularist view is financial decay leads to moral decay. In other words, people are only looting because they're poor.
Oh, that's a very nice point you're making.
You're
course
saying
you're right.
It's not agreed upon by everyone.
Oh, yeah, of course not everyone would agree upon you. That's very nice. So I'm saying, or we are saying, that if a society's morals slide downhill, then you cannot expect its economy to remain strong and vibrant.
Correct.
And they would say, when the evils of capitalism prevail, don't blame people for starting to steal.
Yes.
That's probably how they would put it.
But what you're saying, when you said, let me try to get this straight, because you were saying it's not enough to know. But however, what we can see is that not knowing is only a middle step. Exactly this, because the next generation or a few years later, what one knew isn't even what one knows anymore. Now one tells oneself a different message. It is okay to loot. I am entitled to loot because I don't have X, Y, or Z.
But let's stop just short of that. In the long and tragic story of societal decline that ultimately leads to...
Well, we all do things, even you and I, everybody, we do things that are wrong. We know we should jump out of bed in the morning, but we lie in bed and we pick up our phone and we start looking at, the news or whatever we want to look at. We know that it's a better thing to get up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know.
I wasn't going to name names.
What do you think it is like? Names. What do you think it's like living with a spouse for whom the worst sin she can think of is when she doesn't leap out of bed but sits and looks at her phone? That is, and also, by the way, what you're listening to today...
I didn't say it was the worst thing.
what you're listening to is like a typical breakfast conversation over the cornflakes. So, where other couples might be sort of chit-chatting about this or that, this is the level of dialogue that takes place at the Lapin breakfast table every morning. I just thought you'd like to listen in on it, and for that reason, we're sort of sharing it as today's podcast.
As I was saying, we all do things that we know we shouldn't. Whether it's going for the extra ice cream, the extra scoop of ice cream, or the first scoop of ice cream. Whether it's not getting up at the right time in the morning. Whether it's playing an extra game. What is that game I like playing on my phone that I'm actually have just put myself in a 9-day ban on because I decided it's becoming a little of an addiction. I need to stop this. We all have. We're not angels. That's how God made us. God made us not to be perfect. So that moral weakness is in all of us. It's something we fight all the time.
So here's my question.
So what's your question?
My question is religion the only way to build up a moral muscle, to build up an internal capacity to exercise restraint over our appetites and urges and impulses?
I think it is one of the best ways. I don't think it's the only way, and I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody comes and I'm afraid our military has been terribly damaged since President Clinton's days. However, let's say somebody does join a military, even go back to Sparta, and you have a commanding officer you really respect. I do believe that
yes.
you are making a higher authority. It's not a religion. So I think you do need a higher authority that you feel. I think if you make yourself your own highest authority, yes. You don't have a chance.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, I think. You're exactly right. I was also thinking that military is one of those places also where self-discipline is developed extremely effectively. And you're saying it's usually because there's a hierarchical structure. You're looking up.
Yeah, so I think religion is one of the most common and one of the, I don't want to say easiest because I don't think, but believing there is a God. In other words, again, if you believe God is looking over your shoulder, it doesn't matter if no one sees me loot. It doesn't matter if no one sees me pick up my phone and play a game. I am being watched. And I know that. And it can be presented in a very damaging way, as if someone's there with a thunderbolt just waiting to get you as you act human, or it can be presented more as a loving, and just knowing there is a standard and that you're trying to get as close as you can to the standard, even though you're never going to reach what the standard is. You're trying to do the best you can in full acknowledgement of who you are.
Yes. Yeah. I did an interview earlier today for a podcast about being good fathers. It's a podcast for fathers.
Well, that's a good one for you because you were a very good father. You are a very good father.
Do you think so?
I think so. I mean, I think there are mistakes we made as parents, but
no,
I think
no question,
on the whole, you were a good father.
Okay, and it would be pandering if I said, and
yes,
you were a pretty good
pandering.
mother too. So I won't say that, even though I think that I agree with you basically. But yes, why I bring that up is that I was asked for one thing that would be my most important message. And I said, look, building a family is far too complex an enterprise to be reduced to one slogan, no matter how good it is. So,
I would agree with that 100%.
So I absolutely can. If somebody said to me, well, what is the most important, you and Susan have been blessed to raise a wonderful family. When I say a wonderful family, do you know one of the things I'm so grateful for is that each one of them is walking in our path, which is pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing, and I will just say, though, they're not walking in our identical path. Each of them has with their own twists, but the basic framework and I think that's one of the things that made us, that did, thank God, make us good parents, is that we didn't say you have to be exactly like us for us to accept you.
But we also clearly laid out the boundaries of the
road. Where
road.
the road signs were,
This is a biblical path, and we expect you to walk a biblical path. Exactly how or where... Yeah, I mean, they are all right on that path.
I mean, some of them are on more strict of a path than we are.
Yes, that's probably true as well. Anyway, that's all great. But so I refused to give
One.
what I thought was like the one most
Right.
important thing. But I said I would give you one thing.
the.
One thing. And I'll tell you what I said.
Okay.
And then I would be interested to know how you would answer that same question. What I said was that it is much more effective to do a lot of small things consistently right over the course of, shall we say, a year, than to be indifferent to many things during the course of the year and then have one huge thing, either a massive explosion of anger and application of discipline, or a huge reward like a trip to Disneyland because you've been such good children the whole year, as opposed to a steady diet each and every day of ceaseless vigilance and constant helping children become aware of consequences and actions and rights and responsibilities and so on. So that was what I said, that a consistency over a lot of small things is more important than one huge thing.
I would certainly agree with you. And I think we did tend to do a family vacation that was very valuable, partially because it isolated our children. We went boating, which meant they were in a small area and they had only each other and us for company, basically, for an extended period of time. I think that was very helpful. But if I had to say, do that for, let's say, 3 weeks a year or 2 weeks a year, and the rest of the year don't do the things we did, I would have had to say that was less important. What did we do? We had family meals. We were homeschooling, so we actually had family lunch and supper almost every day of the week. We had reading aloud. That was a big deal, that we had family books. And there was a 10-year age gap, so it wasn't always, the younger ones probably didn't understand sometimes. But we had family books that we read and we discussed, and we had family bonding over that. We certainly had family Bible study. And as a family, we welcomed guests into our house. We were all part of we used to have we had a lot of guests every Shabbat, and it was something we all participated in. And I loved our summer trips, and I think they were very valuable in forming a lot of our family ethos, I don't think they would not have outweighed and said, well, for 11 months of the year, barely see each other or barely spend time together, but you'll get that one month a year where you do it. There's no question that the daily things are more important.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, anything else for our listeners as we prepare to start saying goodbye for today?
Well, I just want to remind them to go look at the Financial Prosperity Collection, available by download for those of you who are not in the United States and Canada, though you can download it if you are in the United States and Canada, and available only for the people at the United States and Canada on a USB flash drive. You call it a thumb drive, I think. I don't know what it is. I just use whatever language the office put in front of me.
It's a little thing. It's a little thing that comes in the mail.
I know what it is, but I don't know what the proper name is. But
now, you also told me that you wanted to tell people about the fact that something wasn't ready last week.
So last week when you did mention the Financial Prosperity Collection last week, and unfortunately, the resource was not up on our website when the podcast first went out. So you may have gone and looked for it and said, this is really annoying. And I agree, and we apologize. It would have been annoying. And then we were having trouble with the download. So the download only went up in the last 48 hours. But as far as I know, everything is up and working now. So please don't go and look at it again, especially because there is a great introductory sale price that isn't going to last for that much longer.
And where should people go?
To www.rabbidaniellapin.com. And while you're there, after you have purchased your Financial Prosperity Collection, or decided not to if that's your decision, I would encourage you to go over and look at my Practical Parenting page and my Susan's Musings page. Susan's Musings I've been doing for years. It goes out once a week. That's where that person read my views of President Trump and basically attacked me for it. And I will tell you that he did that privately through a private email. And I said, one of the things I said is I would like to share. I think it's good for people to hear opposing points of view. May I share your words? And again, he didn't just say, no, I'd rather not, which is fine.
Angry.
He got angry at me. I wrote you privately because this is private. Well, I was asking his permission. I was not saying I'm going to betray you. But if you actually believe what you're saying is so right, why would you not want it shared? Even without your name, just the words. I mean, he was angry at me for asking whether I could share. So again, there's something emotional going on there, not intellectual.
Yes.
However,
without doubt.
that's my Susan's Musings. My Practical Parenting is a relatively new column because I know that not everybody is parenting or grandparenting at this point. Not everyone is interested in that. So if you are interested, if you do have an interest in the next generation or the generation that after that, take a look over at my Practical Parenting page as well. I'd love to hear your response to that. It was lovely spending time with you.
That do you mean with our listeners or with your husband?
Everybody.
Everybody, okay.
Everybody.
Right.
But I have to go now.
And so do I. So all that
goodness.
remains is for us to wish you all a fantastically productive and healthy week, a week of good times with your faith, with your family, with your friends, and with your finance. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.